70 years old Mary Jackson went to the most prestigious beauty salon in the town to get a simple haircut for her birthday. But the way she was treated by the staff left her in tears, leaving the salon instantly. Mary Jackson had always been a quiet, unassuming woman who lived in a cozy cottage on the outskirts of the Michigan. Mary had dedicated her life to teaching mathematics at a local high school for several decades. She was respected by her students for her immense patience and dedication. As a retiree, Mary's days were filled with reading, tending to her garden, and volunteering at the local library. However, on her 70th birthday, she decided to do something entirely out of character. One day, Mary crossed the street and stopped in front of the beauty salon, which was rightfully considered the best in the city. It looked very expensive and luxuriant from the outside, catching the eye with its neon sign and beautifully decorated stained glass windows. Deep down, the old woman felt the long-forgotten excitement of being in a place like that. Pausing for a moment, Mrs. Jackson summoned up her courage and pulled at the door handle. The interior was even more striking than the exterior, and the old woman caught herself thinking that she did the right thing by choosing this particular place. The walls were covered with artfully designed photo collages featuring all kinds of women's hairstyles. A row of leather armchairs and chrome-plated handles and spotless, sparkling mirrors boggled the imagination with their grace and luxury. The extensive set of tools on the tables showed that the employees certainly knew their stuff. "Good morning, can I help you?" a woman named Laura, the salon's hairdresser, asked. Mrs. Jackson seemed to be confused for a moment, and then she said, "I would like to get a haircut and get my hair colored if possible, of course." Laura gave the old woman a professional, appraising look and said, "Yes, we do haircuts. Which one would you like? But I should tell you right away that it won't be cheap since our beauty salon is considered the best in the city." Mrs. Jackson got abashed for a moment and then, turning as red as a lobster, she pulled out a battered fashion magazine from her purse. "Here, take a look. I want this one. See, don't worry about the money. I will pay whatever you say," the old woman replied, showing the hairstylist a page in her magazine. Laura raised her eyebrows and, hardly restraining a malicious laugh, replied, "You know, you really don't understand what you're asking for. This haircut is for young people. It won't look good on you. You have sparse hair and a thin face, and that grayness, trust me, a few snips of the scissors will leave you completely bald." "And then what?" "Then I'll have to give you a free wig or something. I think you should choose something simpler and cheaper." "But this haircut is just what I want, and I would also like to dye my gray hair," Mrs. Jackson answered timidly, her eyes filled with tears. Slowly, the rest of the salon employees joined in on the conversation, eyeing the modestly dressed old woman with interest, grinning maliciously and whispering to each other, "But why do you even need such a haircut? Are you planning on sweeping your elderly husband off his feet?" Someone made a crack about Mrs. Jackson. "I don't have a husband. He's been gone for over 10 years now," the old woman replied, her voice trembling, mastering all her strength so as not to burst into tears. "Well, never mind. You can pick up a younger one with this hairstyle," Laura added in a mocking voice. Her words were followed by unanimous laughter from her co-workers, who were very amused by the situation. Unable to put up with the ridicule, Mrs. Jackson left the salon hastily, blotting her eyes with a handkerchief as she went. The old woman crossed the square and turned into a quiet street where a more modest hairdressing salon was located. It turned out to be small, with only 2 armchairs and no sign of external luxury and gloss. However, when Mrs. Jackson got inside, a pretty girl came out to greet her, her eyes glowing with concern and cordiality. When their hairdresser asked about what kind of haircut she would like, the old woman showed the same photo from the magazine. Deep down, Mrs. Jackson didn't believe she would be able to get the haircut here, especially after the cold shoulder she was given at the elite beauty salon. However, much to the old woman's surprise, Emma, the hairdresser, turned out to be a connoisseur in her field. The girl was happy to make Mary's dream come true, giving her the gorgeous hairstyle which looked even better in reality than in the photo. On top of that, Emma dyed the client's gray hair the color she wished for, and as a bonus, even did her nails, thereby transforming Mrs. Jackson into a real beauty. "Thank you, you're a real magician, sweetie. You know, this is the best present ever. It's my birthday today, I've turned 70, the old woman said with delight, wondering at her own reflection in the mirror. During the time it took to do Mrs. Jackson's haircut, Emma chatted with her about many things, pouring her heart out to the attentive client. As it turned out, the girl was an orphan who took hairdressing courses a few years back. Unfortunately, Emma lived alone with her son and struggled to make ends meet living in a rented apartment. In the course of their conversation, Mrs. Jackson learned that the poor girl's husband left her 5 years ago, and with a small child, too. Emma's husband, John, was a freelance construction worker who traveled from state to state in search of profitable projects. All that time, the girl lived under the same roof with his sick mother, who was bedridden for many years. One day, a few months after her husband went to the north of the country, Emma got a letter from him. The man wrote in a dry and frigid manner that he had found his love there and started a new family. This shocking news made the girl cry all night. She refused to believe that John had betrayed her. But time went by and her husband never returned. His old mother's health got worse every day, even more so after she learned the news of her son's betrayal. The old woman died within 2 months of learning what John had done. Having buried the woman whom she treated like a mother, Emma locked up the house and left the keys with the neighbors. Although it was hard to leave her home, the girl couldn't bear to stay in the house that was a constant reminder of her ex-husband's betrayal, having burnt all the bridges. Emma moved to another city where she got a job at a small hair salon. Of course, they paid mere pennies here, but the girl was not discouraged and was full of hopes about the future. Saying goodbye to Emma, Mrs. Jackson hugged her and thanked her for being so kind and cordial. Although Mary's heart was restless after hearing the girl's touching life story, she somehow found the strength to leave. Relishing in the gentle sun, the old woman decided to walk to the supermarket to treat herself to something delicious for her birthday. However, before she could even take a dozen steps, a cheerful, girlish voice called out to her. "Mrs. Jackson, is that really you? I'm so glad to see you. You look amazing." Mary turned around to see Kate Simmons, a girl she taught English at school, standing opposite her. "Thank you. It's nice to see you, too. You know, it's my birthday today. I'm turning 70 years old. Would you like to come over for dinner?" "I'll cook something delicious," Mrs. Jackson suggested. "I would love to, but I have a better idea. How about stopping by one place now and then celebrating your birthday at a restaurant?" "Don't thank me. I owe you so much, believe me. This is the least I can do for you," Kate said, and took the old woman's arm eagerly. Much to Mrs. Jackson's surprise, her former student first ordered dinner at the restaurant and then brought the old woman to that same elite beauty salon where she had been denied services not so long ago. As it turned out, Kate Simmons ended up becoming a businesswoman, and she actually owned this place. Taking Mrs. Jackson by the hand, the girl led her inside the salon where she proudly introduced her beloved teacher to the staff. Laura, who was standing next to her, didn't immediately realize that it was the same old woman who stopped by this morning. It was because her appearance had noticeably changed since they last saw each other. But when Mrs. Jackson met her gaze, Laura shyly lowered her eyes and put on a mask of cordial sympathy. Kate, eager to hear what her former teacher was thinking about her salon, was impatiently shifting from foot to foot. Sensing her emotional state, the old woman said, "You have the best salon in the city, but your staff is mean and inattentive. They all lack humanity and common decency." As Mrs. Jackson was saying this, she brushed aside a tear and headed to the exit. Kate caught up with the teacher at the door, and taking her into her office was getting ready to listen to what the upset woman had to say. When the old woman calmed down a little, she told her ex-student what had happened that morning. Kate listened to Mrs. Jackson patiently, and then her face changed, and she left the office. The business lady gathered her subordinates in the hall and, casting a menacing look at everyone, said in an icy tone, "You're all fired. This is the best salon in town, and it offers the highest salary. I'm sorry you didn't appreciate it. Let this be your lesson. Goodbye." Starting tomorrow, don't ever set foot in here again." The frustrated employees dispersed around the salon, getting used to the idea that they had become instantly unemployed. Meanwhile, Kate phoned all of her classmates, inviting them to dinner to celebrate Mrs. Jackson's birthday. It's worth saying that the celebration was wonderful, and the woman of the day hadn't felt so happy in a long time. The next morning, following Mrs. Jackson's recommendation, Kate offered Emma the position of a senior hairstylist at her salon. However, this wasn't the last good news for the unfortunate orphan on that memorable day. It was only that evening that Emma got to learn the major news. Mary Jackson invited Emma and her son to move in with her. At first, the girl thought it was all nothing but an amazing dream where any of her wishes could come true, and she feared that as soon as she opened her eyes, the magic would disappear, dissolving in a haze of fog. But no matter how much she rubbed her eyes, the pleasant reality persisted. On top of that, Mrs. Jackson, who had no close relatives left, drew up a will that decided that after her death, all her savings and the house should come into Emma's ownership. However, the orphan girl who treats Mary Jackson as her family prefers not to think about the possible inheritance. Instead, Emma prays to God every day for her patron's health and long